Hi, this is Athlete Story and I'm Anja Bolbjerg. In today's Athlete Story, you are in for a free world-class coaching session. Not only does our guest, American Joe Jacobi, have an Olympic gold medal in whitewater canoeing, which I think is so cool. He's also such a reflective, generous source of wisdom of all the lessons he's taken with him from the river that he now coaches CEOs and business leaders. He's not your typical guru, hyped up kind of coach. He just has some really solid points. They can just wake you up when you're getting a little too comfortable. Joe started whitewater canoeing when he was 12 years old on a river in Washington, D.C. And it was on this river that he fell in love with the process of improving and see how he could be more efficient so that he could be faster and beat his friends. While the boys were competing against each other, they were also learning how to compete against themselves. This very competitive but still friendly environment was Joe's incubator. And 10 years later, he stood at the top of the podium at the Olympics in Barcelona. I am so excited for this call. So let's not wait any longer. Let's just bring him in. Hi there.
Hello.
Oh, good to finally talk to you.
Yeah, no, it's great to connect with you as well.
Welcome to the show, Athlete Story.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could help me and my listeners by taking us inside a canoe in a river before we imagine, the picnic trip down a little.
I have a description of our sport that I hope you, of all people, will absolutely love. So I just want you to imagine that you're in a canoe at the top of a snow-covered mountain. But it gets warm and the water and the snow melts and turns to water. And you're going downhill in the canoe. And it's just moving water now instead of snow. And in our sport of whitewater canoe slalom, instead of the slalom poles being fixed into the ground, they're actually hung from wires over the river, and you have to maneuver, just like skiing, slalom skiing, you have to maneuver between the poles. The one key difference between skiing and canoeing is that if you touch the poles in canoeing, you get penalty seconds added to your time. So if you touch a pole, that's 2 seconds added to your time. If you miss the poles altogether, that's 50 seconds added to your time. So the idea is to be as fast as you can paddling between the poles while you navigate this whitewater river for time. It is just one of the most fun things that you can do in your life. It's that feeling of gravity and working with a force of nature that is so much stronger than you and I could ever be. And so the people who are really successful in our sport, they are the ones that do a great job of taking the energy of the river and channeling that energy into their boat, into their paddle, into their body, and get that energy working for them. It's not your own muscle, but it's how you manage the muscle of the river. And those are the people who tend to do really well in our sport.
So you're not fighting the water, or that's not what you want to do anyways, fight the water. You want to more like find the way for the water to help you?
Actually, that is such an insightful question and observation, Anja, because I think I remember when we were competing, 26 years ago here at the 92 Olympic Games. My canoe partner and I were the smallest, lightest weight team in the race. Like, our combined weight was under 300 pounds. Most of our competitors were much bigger and stronger than us, upwards of 350 pounds combined. And I think in a lot of ways that when you're strong, like, you get this idea that it's a fight. And I think that a lot of times when you're smaller and you have to figure out other ways to work with the energy, it's more like a dance than a fight. Nice. And I think that's always a nice kind of disposition to take with you, not just out onto the river, but in life. I think there's a lot of forces out there that we can work with. Every day we have to kind of consciously choose, do we want to fight that force or do we want to try to work with it? And just have to decide, and then
Oh, that's a nice image.
it's a good, at least something nice to strive for. It doesn't always work. Sometimes we do get into our fight mode, but hopefully choose the dance mode a little bit more than the fight mode.
How does courage come into this? Is there fear and courage involved in jumping into whitewater?
I think being honest with fear has a role, right? I mean, I think these two are very joined at the hip, so to speak. You have to be honest with what scares you, with what's bothering you. I wrote a post about courage and confidence. I think everybody wants confidence. They want that feeling of confidence to arrive when they're in the start gate. And you can probably remember instances in your own competitive situations. Sometimes confidence showed up and sometimes it didn't. Then that leaves you with one more choice. That's when you can choose to be courageous. Confidence either came or it didn't, but courage was a choice. I think as long as you spend time being very honest and open with what isn't working well for you, and maybe what are points of fear or what are challenges that you're working with, I think it becomes then much easier to choose courage in the right moment and in the right situation and in a way that works for you. But it's a practice. It's a practice like anything.
So what you're saying is that if you're being honest to yourself about what it is that you're afraid of, then you can deal with it by choosing to be braver about that part. Whereas if you are not being honest to yourself, it's always going to be another reason or excuse to not do it.
Absolutely. I was the chief executive officer of the U.S. Canoeing Federation for 5 years, and we were always talking with coaches and athletes about, the pursuit of high performance. And I think a lot of organizations and federations and Olympic committees tend to focus on the physical, mental, and technical aspects of getting better. And what you were just alluding to right there is more what I believe are the emotional and spiritual sides of manifesting energy and manifesting performance and the things that you want to show up in the start gate.
But then there's another added, it could be added difficulty or it could be a help. But you were two in your canoe, right?
Yeah, another really great observation. I think that when you decide to strap yourself into a canoe with another person, there's a lot of trust that has to happen. You want to know something about what that person's made of, because his thoughts are now your thoughts. His choices are now your choices. And
probably the sport it compares best to at the Winter Olympics would be the bobsled.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly when you think about the team element and the trust, things are happening so quickly that I think one of the really transferable life skills and business skills, I think, from sport like bobsled and luge or whitewater canoeing in a tandem situation is the unspoken communication. How you communicate with your body language. Like, I know that I was in the back of our doubles canoe and my partner Scott was in the front, or what we call the bow. And the way we actually paddled was I would always be looking towards his body movements to indicate to me what he was trying to do with the boat. If he dropped one shoulder and put his paddle out to the side, it kind of indicated that he wanted to move the boat left. And then once I knew that, then I could instinctively do a stroke that could help the boat move left or help him turn the boat to the left. And so you're always kind of looking at those, reading the other person and trying to understand what's happening. And it did require a lot of time and a lot of work together. But it is such a, I don't know, for lack of a better word, joyful experience to paddle well on a course, on a race course, and share that experience with another person. And I think you and I could both think about our business experience and our client experiences and imagine where that nonverbal communication becomes very important. I think one of the great life lessons that the river has taught me, regardless of one person, two people, for every advantage that the river gives you, there's always an equal and opposite disadvantage, and you just have to kind of work with those different forces.
If we stay with the image of the bobsled for a bit, you have all the winter sports, whether it's on snow or ice.
Yes.
It's about the glide, and I guess water sports is the same.
I wrote about this idea of glide in one of my Sunday Morning Joe posts. I feel like one of the things that I learned from my time in canoeing, or when I, even for the little bit of time that I spend on cross country skis, and you push on one ski and you just want to see how much energy you can get out of one push. And if you can just be patient and quiet enough.
This team seems to have a little more of a patient style.
Kind of let the energy just take care of itself.
Kind of waiting for the race to come to them. I
think people would be surprised, like, how much momentum that you can take with you on your journey.
Yeah, they just control the boat, put it where it needs to be, and the rest just happens.
If you get very proficient at the idea of glide,
I like to see that, especially on the top of the course.
You'll find that you actually have more capacity and more energy to use at the moments when you really need it. I think when you miss out on the idea of glide as a concept of kind of letting a unit of energy kind of ride out its course in anything, whether it's presenting an idea or whether it's a stride in on an ice skate or a paddle stroke in a canoe. I think when you just give yourself the patience to let that energy carry, you begin to see that a lot of times you don't need as much force and energy, and that quiet disposition gives you a chance to really feel what else is going on and where else you might be able to take on more energy. One of the things I really learned about canoeing is that when you weren't taking a stroke, like, you could feel the current of the river even better. And if we believe that we're navigating river currents of life and business, we have to slow down enough to quiet ourselves enough to really understand what the direction of business is going, for example. I think we just get so hyped up to try to check the next box that we just forget that idea of how to glide.
That kind of leads to what I know you're talking about, course correction. Can you tell us about course correction? How does that apply in your sport, and how do you use that image in your coaching?
It's putting yourself in the position to respond to what doesn't go well. What I think happens in the course of doing whatever it is that we want to do well, whether that's ski down a hill or navigate a river or run a marathon or launch a business, it never goes as planned. I think people kind of get a little impatient and they get fed up and they just sort of want to jump ship and move on to a new river, so to speak. I use the navigation of a whitewater river as a metaphor for performing better in business and in life. And I would say one of the most popular, if not the most popular, breakout session among companies and organizations last year was this idea of course correction. One of the things that I talk about when we won the Olympics back in 1992, I never say that we were the best or the fastest boat on the day of the Olympic Games. What I tell people that I feel like we did well was that we corrected mistakes and anticipated mistakes a little bit better than the competition did that day.
Can you take us back to when you started this sport?
I was very lucky in the way I started canoeing. I don't know if you've ever read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes.
The fortuitous circumstances you have in your life that are kind of beyond your control. So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area on the Potomac River, where there was world-class whitewater in a major metropolitan area, which is very rare in the sport of canoeing. At that time, the legendary coach of the sport, all the world champions, the U.S. team was paddling really well at the time. I was 12. This was the 1980s, and the coach was trying to recruit some new people into the sport, and their recruiting efforts yielded me. That is not saying a lot. It wasn't like I was a very athletic or fit person. I just liked showing up with this group of people, and I guess I was almost too young to understand how good these athletes were. My first workout on the Potomac River, everybody there had won a world medal of some kind in a world championships, a World Cup race. They were truly high performance paddlers. And what was crazy about that was 10 years later, on the day that we won the Olympic Games, everybody who was at that first workout was either my teammate or had retired and become one of my coaches. And even my coaching and training programs today, I talk about this idea of cultures of excellence. And that's what really kind of brought me along. And I was so lucky to grow up around those athletes. And we were very transparent in the way we shared information with each other. It was a super competitive environment. I think having that level of competition every day was important. And so today we hear about this idea of deliberate practice. I like that expression. How can we...
And by deliberate practice, you mean like practice as if it's competition?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So does that mean you would do full runs in practice always?
That's a great question. It wasn't that we would do full runs. It just means that we were competitive in everything that we did. That was just such an acceptable way to kind of work with each other and against each other, but really with each other. To your question, I think it just seemed that whatever we did on the Potomac River, we did it competitively.
In your career, you made a decision at one point to go move your whole base camp and trains in another spot?
In North Carolina, exactly.
Why did you make that move?
There were a couple of factors that went into that. You know, my canoe partner had worked at this amazing whitewater raft company in western North Carolina called the Nantahala Outdoor Center. There was one other time that Whitewater was in the Olympic Games. It was a one-time deal in 1972. And most of the 1972 Olympic team for the United States were actually employees or became employees of the Nantahala Outdoor Center. So there was a great history there. One of the things that the Nantahala offered that was so different for us was that in a place like Washington, D.C. that was expensive, you had to either go to school or have a job to live there. At the Nantahala, it was you could put the proverbial eggs all in one basket and just say, this is what we do. We don't want to get to the finish line of the Olympic trials or the Olympic Games and ask ourselves, was there something more we could have done? Maybe if we hadn't taken that extra shift at work, maybe if we hadn't taken that extra class in school. But what if we just put everything in and said, this is our life, this is what we do? And it just turned out that the remote nature of Appalachia and the people and the culture and the spirit was like the perfect place for doing that. It just also gave us a chance to, instead of just be a part of a top-notch training group, it gave my canoe partner and I a chance to build our own. And that's what happened. And it was also a very important part of my development, not just as an athlete, but as a person. A lot of what I do in my life today is, a lot of it is modeled after the two men who founded the Nantahala Outdoor Center and their approach on serving the outdoors, their approach on finding flow in your life, and just the way that we try to work harder to get more people outside and outdoors. Those were the underpinnings of our existence at the Nantahala Outdoor Center for 3 years as we pursued the Olympic Games. It was a wonderful way to live and train for the 92 Olympics.
And it paid off.
Well, it did. Those French athletes are here because they're starting to practice for the World Championships that are going to be hosted here in La Seu d'Urgell in 2019. That is what we started to do 1 year before the Olympic Games. My canoe partner and I spent almost 100 days in La Seu d'Urgell in the year before the Olympic competition. If you want to be good at the Olympic course, like you got to spend time at the Olympic course.
Yeah.
And we did that.
This is kind of a weird question to give to you, but I would like to have your input anyways. There seems to be a generation of parents who have kind of tried to avoid competition for the children. What is your take on competition?
I am a huge advocate of competition. One of the things I always challenge people is how can we turn deliberate practice into deliberate competition and not back away from that. And I would actually take this opportunity. This is pretty interesting. My family and I left the United States to move to Spain for a lot of reasons. So I'm here with my wife, Lisa, and our daughter, our 16-year-old daughter, Seo, who competes for the United States program, but practices with the Spanish program here in La Salle d'Urgell. We embrace competition so much at all levels that I think one of the great opportunities for us to be here is for our daughter to be able to take advantage of traveling throughout Europe with other friends and other athletes, and all the experiences that go along with that are fantastic. You know, for where the sport of canoeing is competitively in the United States, there just are not a lot of race opportunities. There's not a lot of races, and there's not a lot of people to race against. And you compare that with here in Europe, where the sport is really strong. There's a lot of kids who do it, and there are races everywhere. I would also say that I think even for athletes like yourself and for me, that I think as we get older, our outlook on competition changes as well. It's not about getting rid of competition out of our life, but it's working with competition very differently. So today I run marathons. My goal isn't to win. I have my mindsets in the way that I approach marathon training today remind me nothing of the way I was as an athlete. I very rarely wear a watch. I don't measure very much what I do when I'm running. I just go out and enjoy myself, and I do find ways to challenge myself. But that's what competition does for you. It gives you a bit of a measuring stick every once in a while to say, this is who I am. Where am I? And I think of that question, it's really healthy.
And maybe it gives you a reason to go where that pain is that you would otherwise avoid.
I love that. That is, Anja, it's 100% spot on. And I think that in life, as we get older, we need to find ways to awaken ourselves. And I think competition is the perfect way to do that. And it's not competition in terms of, oh, I have to go win something or I have to go beat somebody, but it's just being courageous enough to show up on the day and say, I'm ready to be measured and see where I am.
It can be tempting to opt out of that being measured part.
I think so. You know, I don't want to feel like I'm making judgments about other people and the way they look at competition, and but I think it's just it's a reality of the way the structures and networks of and communities of our world work. I think competition gives people a path to rise up, and ultimately our communities and our structures are very dependent upon the development of new leaders, and there's no doubt competition helps to do that. I think it could be maybe the worst time ever to be moving away from competition.
Why is that?
Oh, I just think because of all the change and innovation that's just coming into our world right now. When I think about the habits and mindsets that it takes for us to engage with the dynamics of societies and the change and technology and innovations and the challenges that come with it, I think competition is exactly what gets people to ask themselves more challenging questions. What if we did that? What if I learned this? That's the gift that competition gives us.
Mm-hmm.